Hello and welcome to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I'm your host, John Stancorp. Today's hang is with the incredible Jennifer Batten. With guitar in hand, she's toured the world and recorded alongside legends like Michael Jackson and Jeff Beck. From thrilling audiences with Michael Jackson's electrifying performances to sharing the spotlight with Jeff Beck, Jennifer's guitar mastery has resonated across the globe. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button below and ring the bell for notifications. And now, let's hang with Jennifer Batten. You've got your studio beautifully adorned. That's cool. I know.
Oh, that's my living room.
Okay, living room. Okay, very nice.
Yeah, there's not a square inch where I don't have art in this house. I either have to get new walls or start getting rid of some of the art to get some freshies.
Yeah. Now, are you going out on your solo tour or?
No, the next two things are two different Michael Jackson tributes.
Oh, okay.
And then actually before that happens, I'm doing a solo show for a college in Phoenix.
Okay.
So December is going to be super busy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it'd be interesting to kind of start at the beginning from and there's along the way you can fill me in. And I don't really have scripted questions, although I do my homework. I try not to ask well-trodden questions that you kind of know are coming down the pike. But the thing that I find interesting is that you came up in an amazingly fertile period of time for guitar players. And you entered GIT at a time when there was amazing teachers and amazing players. You had Ron Eshate and Joe DiOrio and just amazing group of instructors, plus the players that were there at the time, you and Steve Lynch and those folks. I'd be kind of interested to kind of get the landscape of that because it's Eddie is king at that point, right? I mean, he's
Not quite.
he
Not quite.
wasn't,
His first record came out.
not quite. I can't remember if you graduated in were you there 78 or 79? I can't remember.
Graduated March of '79, and his first record was out, but it really hadn't exploded yet. It's just kind of people were talking and sharing in the underground, as it were.
Right. So yeah, I'm just any way that you'd like to feel that if we were putting together an idea for a script of a movie for that period of time, what might
Yeah.
some of that look like?
Well, I remember I used to get Guitar Player magazines. I used to ride my bike down to a record shop to get Guitar Player magazines. And the GIT, before it became Musicians Institute, it was just a guitar school. And they were just getting off the ground, and they were advertising a weekend symposium in LA, and I lived in San Diego, and went up for the symposium, and most of the information was over my head. I'd been playing since I was 8 years old, but I was learning from people in music shops teaching me songs. I didn't learn anything about theory. And so a lot of the guys that were teaching that weekend, like Mundell Lowe was one of them, Howard Roberts, they were all talking jazz. I had no clue what the hell they were saying, but I was still intrigued. And so I took a test to get into the school before the weekend was over and failed miserably. Um, and the Pat Hicks, the owner of the school, he had me do some ear training kind of stuff, and he asked me to play a G major 7 chord. And I go, no problem. And I play, first position G7 dominant chord, and I didn't know the difference. So he said, you're not quite ready for the school. So I went back to San Diego and studied with Peter Sprague for 6 months, who's a monster bebop player. And that really got me up to speed. So I was able to get into the school, but it was still all I could do to keep up with the curriculum because it moved so fast at that point that a couple years later, they started losing so many people that they spread the curriculum out into a year and a half,
Right.
which I kind of wish I had that kind of time to learn it because it was like, I just got down the major modes and now we're into harmonic minor already and my brain is scrambled. So it was a hell of an education, man. It was a kick in the ass. Um, But it was a really great time to be there, and I'm glad I was there in the beginning when it was a jazz school. You know, at that point, the entire school was 60 students, two classes.
Oh,
And weirdly, I was the only female in the whole school, which kind of blew my mind. You know, the first day I'm looking around going, This is not a normal school. This is not what I grew up with, where it was 50-50."
yeah.
But I loved the school, and especially Joe DiOrio and his teaching methods and his fresh sound, because it wasn't just bebop. He was into, the super modal stuff and intervallic jumps and stuff that sounded really fresh to my ear. So I kind of glommed on to him. And after the school was over, I got in my first band ever, which was kind of a fusion band. We would do Larry Carlton, George Duke kind of stuff. And eventually the same band was also doing weddings and cover band stuff like 80s Pat Benatar and the Police and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it was all over the map as far as what I was listening to and what I was playing for a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you had such great instructors. You could go do a master class with Tommy Tedesco, and he would talk about all sorts of things and his world of sight reading on film dates or television dates, and then you could have Ron Eshte or Joe
Yeah.
Dior. So yeah, what an amazing, perfect time to be, because you came from the rock thing and you were able to infuse your rock playing with the more advanced harmony kind of stuff. And
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Tommy Tedesco was a gem. I think he really enjoyed the students. He only came, I want to say once a month. It could have been more often, but he would bring sheet music in from the dates he had done.
right.
And I'll never forget one time he goes, "Okay, here's your music for today." And I take a look at it and I go, "No problem. I'm going to ace this." So we all play it down, no problem. And then he goes, "Okay, let's do it again. And I'm going to put some counter rhythms against it." And we all fell off our chairs. It was just like, oh God, where I thought was one is not one anymore. And this is scary shit. And he also did a wonderful thing where he took us two at a time to his sessions. And the one that I went to was they were filming with an orchestra for the soundtrack of Roots 2.
Okay.
And I know he didn't get permission. He was just a punk. He's like, what are they gonna do? Put two more chairs around me, and as long as we're not disruptive.
Right,
And
right.
I'll never forget. He was such a punk. The director or conductor asked him at one point if he could use a different guitar, and he goes, "Sure." And when the guy wasn't looking, he took his ovation and spun it around 360 and played the same thing again. It's like so irreverent. But honestly, it was those two things that scared the shit out of me of not wanting to be a reading session player. Anyway, because most guitar players are shit readers. There's the top 1% that get all the reading gigs. And I can read, but you don't want me to be reading single notes for a major gig.
Yeah. Yeah, there are those amazing readers like Tommy and Dean Parks and those guys. And I know Dean came up through the North Texas thing, but yeah, you're right. There's just a small percentage of guys that can just read incredible, uh,
Yeah.
dense stuff. Um, so your first band, you're doing fusion, but were you doing any other? Were you doing any kind of session dates with that? I mean, or was it strictly live playing, or with the idea of putting together
Yeah.
a project at some point?
Yeah. I started recording within I guess the first few years after I graduated, but at that point it was 100% worked out.
Yeah,
I would spend days and days and just burn up my fingers coming up with stuff that I dug, and then I'd go in completely prepared and knock it out.
yeah,
So I wasn't doing improv for quite a few years.
yeah,
In the beginning, the sessions were few and far between. In fact, that band that I was in a cover band with we started writing material too, and that was 100% worked out. And once we started writing, that's when the band breaks up. Okay, we're ready for the next level. Let's just break up.
Yeah. And what you and Steve Lynch were doing, at least to my recollection, predated some of the Stanley Jordan stuff, because I love reading your columns in Guitar Player. I think it was Guitar Player, where you would have columns like on the chordal capo and coming up with these really cool inversions and really interesting non-linear, like triadic type things like Ed was playing, but you really cool things where you could make the guitar sound a lot more symphonic and broader, and you could
Mm.
voice chords in a way that you would never have gotten to otherwise.
Yeah, I did columns for Guitar for the Practicing Musician, and then maybe a year for Guitar Player. It was just too hard to keep up with the deadlines, with all everything else I had going on. But yeah, I was, especially in the beginning, once I graduated, I was really influenced by Steve Lynch, who was in my class. And he was influenced by, once a month we would have a, almost, well, 99% of them were guitar players that came, like Pat Metheny came one time to basically to inspire us. And, here's a star from the outside world, and here's what you aspire to. Lee Ritenour, Larry Carlton. But one month it was Emmett Chapman
Oh,
who
yeah.
invented the stick.
Yeah.
And, all of us are going, we're working on these six strings, and that's going to take a lifetime. And none of us are going to get a stick. We enjoy it, but it's not going to happen, you know? And, but Steve, it planted a seed in his head where he's looking at this guy not picking, and everything is touch sensitive. And that's when Steve, parallel to Van Halen, he wasn't aware of Van Halen at the time, started experimenting on using, I think at that time it was the three fingers of the right hand. And he came up with a system that was just brilliant. And he played a tune at graduation. I would check in with him every few weeks to see what he was up to with it. And I go, man, I really want to learn this, but if I do, I'm going to sink with all this other stuff they're forcing on us. So it wasn't until after I graduated, I asked him for a demo tape of things that he was working on. And I took one finger and I was burning it out and it didn't sound good. I got to go to your house and get a lesson. So I did. And that just opened up the world for me, to just start experimenting with what you could do with
Yeah.
tapping. So, yeah, I ended up doing a version of Giant Steps, with worked out solo.
Yeah.
Because I mean that song's hard enough to play with just one hand, when you're trying to think of two. Ah.
Well, with two-handed tapping would be just otherworldly.
I'll leave that to Stanley.
Yeah. Right. Were you using an early form of like a string dampener, like a handkerchief or something around the neck to what were you, because that would predate the device that, I don't know if you patented that device, the string dampener thing. I'd seen you and Michael and Angela Badio use those, but you're two of the only players I remember seeing use those.
Yeah, one of the first things I worked on was Flight of the Bumblebee, and you had to have some kind of damper because I was all over the neck. If you don't have that, the open strings are going to ring out because you got distortion going. And I would use a sock tied around the first fret. But then I thought it's not practical to do that live because when you need an open string, when you need a harmonic, that's got to be out of the way. So at that time, there was a guy named Buddy Dunkel that was in Southern California that invented one called the Kleenex with a K. And he would advertise in the back of Guitar World and classifieds. So I got a him and actually met him. But I would modify it. So he had foam rubber that went, or yeah, foam rubber that went against the strings. And even though it's down here by the nut, it was an arm. Even if you're playing with your hand above it and picking above it, you'd still hear that clicking from the string hitting the foam rubber. So I switched over to piano string damper material and also made another mod where I glued on a little tab that was on the bass string side of it so you
Mhm.
could flip it out of the way without damaging the material. So I used that for a while. And then fast forward, I think he stopped making them. I mean, I don't think it's ever been in retail stores.
Yeah.
And there was a guy in Germany that made some that were really nice. And then there was nothing. So I was starting to go to China for some workshops and stuff, and befriended a Chinaman. And actually, before I did that, I made a prototype in America for my own, and I didn't patent it because there was already a patent by George Van Epps in, I think, 1950 or something. And those jazz guys like Jim Hall was, or not Jim Hall, Herb Ellis was another one that was using his damper. And the idea for them was to restrict the overtones when they were playing jazz.
Right.
Um, so I got one of his. I begged it off of somebody. I have a little string damper material museum. Anyway, I had a prototype made in America, and they wanted a ridiculous amount of money, like $100 a piece. My cost,
Oh, wow.
I'd have to double it. Who's going to pay $200 for a device for a guitar that you paid $500 for, oftentimes? So when I started going to China, I thought, this is the time to make the move. So I befriended this guy and ended up having 1,000 of them made over there. And I sent the prototype and I said, send me what you can do. They made a beautiful copy of it. And I go, great, make 1,000. The 1,000 that they sent had nothing to do with the prototype they sent. And I heard that's a common scam. If you're not breathing over their shoulder, they're going to cut corners and use the cheapest materials possible. And it was a complete nightmare. But I ended up getting them made. And I'm just running out. I'm saving the last few for myself, actually. But for certain tunes, it's really necessary. A lot of people are using those Groove Gear and Gator both have the Velcro wraps.
Yeah.
I started using Gator sometimes because they're a longer wrap. It's easier to put on. So, I mean, I only use 6 string, but if you have 7 or 8 string, the Gator is going to be the one to use.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it pretty easy to move around as you're playing to be able
Yeah.
to slide on and off.
Honestly, I started playing Sir about 8 months ago, and the strings are pretty high on the left side of the nut, and I don't think installing a damper is going to work. I think it's going to screw up the tuning. So
Okay.
I've been really resident. What is the word? I'm
Reluctant?
not going to do it.
Reticent or reluctant, perhaps?
That's the word. Yeah, one of them are words. Reticent. Jesus. Yeah. So that's my string damper story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's it. And then the thing that I found fascinating is just your foray into guitar synthesis. That's a yields wildly exciting results, but it's not as it's a very circuitous route to get what you want the way you want, especially in your situation when it's on the front line in a gig situation when you're on tour, making sure it's consistent night after night, giving you the sounds that you want and also tracking and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't know what year you would have gotten into guitar synthesis, but what you've done with it's extraordinary.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm pretty impulsive. I walked into Guitar Center for a strap and walked out with a synth system.
They
A
like
lot
it that
more
way.
money.
They like it that way. Come in for a pick, walk out with a Les Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, they love seeing me come in. Um, so, gosh, I don't remember what model I got, but it was one of the clunky floor models with the 13-pin cable, and the 13-pin was just so unreliable. You get one of those pin is bent, and the whole thing's out of business, and the cables are very expensive. But once I got the gig with Jeff Beck, I thought there's no way uh, I will be satisfied with only comping with guitar sounds. So
Right.
I got into synth again, and I was going to the Frankfurt show not long after the original band with Jeff, he got together at SIR in New York, and it was going to be Tony Levin and Terry Bozzio. And I walked in, and I'm looking around and going, where's the keyboard player? And Jeff had no intention of having a keyboard player. And I'm going like, wow. So after that, watch. I went straight to the Frankfurt show. I walked out of there with there was a company called Axon, a German company. They had the fastest tracking synth, and so I thought, great, I got this happening, but the sounds were not good. And so then I got a Roland JV1080 for sounds, and the two companies they didn't talk well together. It was very glitchy, and um, I was using it at rehearsals and did a lot of programming. And kind of at the last minute, I go, this is just not going to work. I can't be playing a C chord and having a sharp 9 flat 5 come out. It's just, you know, it's just not happening. So I ended up with all Roland gear. I had a Roland MIDI converter and a couple of J1080s for sounds and a ridiculous size rack. It pains me to think how much money Jeff paid to take that rack around the world.
Oh yeah.
It's so expensive. And now, especially now, because you can have 1,000 times more sounds and 1,000 times faster tracking with the Fishman triple play. Just a piece of plastic on your guitar, it talks to your laptop, and it's wicked quick.
Really?
So,
So that
yeah, that was 20 years ago.
somebody getting started into that now, that's what you would recommend as the Fishman.
Absolutely.
And so what's the what's creating what's the source of the tones or the sounds?
They have an app that can be a standalone or it can be within your DAW. Um, and they have loads of sounds totally dialed in. If
Really?
you're going to go to outside sources and you want to bring in outside packs, you have to tell each string what sound you want, which is what I had to do back in the Beck days anyway. And then if you want to add a second sound, then you have to start all over and go, okay, I want this string to also have this sound. In fact, with the Fishman triple play, you can break your guitar up into quadrants. And for instance, you can have drum sounds on the lower half, the lower three strings, and melody on the top, and then two other sounds in the other two quadrants. And what a brilliant writing tool that is, because the ideas come and like, let's lay down a groove, bam, and then now you got the bass, and then add whatever sounds on top, turn it off, and play guitar on top of it. So it's a phenomenal piece of gear and really reasonably priced. I think it's $300 or $400. And when you download sounds, you just hit download and go out to lunch because there's so much that they give you. Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. When I'd seen Steve Morse a few times, and I think he was using a pickup called Ghost Ride or something, Ghost something. I
Yeah.
forget, but and he was explaining that at that time that was the fastest tracking device. And it's amazing when you hear when it's done well and you're hearing it. It's just incredible. I think most guitar players would want that in their arsenal, but there, as you just explained, there's a ton of work in programming and making sure that you're to be equal parts guitar player, keyboardist. That's a huge undertaking.
Well, it's not as huge as you would think if you stick with what they give you. As far as the stuff that's already dialed in, there's several hundred sounds. I think the average guitar player would be happy with that for a lifetime. And that is just that's the sound I want, go. You know, it's very simple. And just to tell you an example of how fast it is, I did quite a few clinics for them a few years ago, and I'm sure it's even faster now. Um, I would dial up a fretless bass sound and do Teen Town,
Oh wow.
and that's a pretty quick solo. And for anybody that's ever worked with guitar synth, the bass sounds are the ones that are going to lag because they're an octave lower than guitar, but it kept up. You don't feel any latency at all. So I did that on purpose, playing a bass sound because it's just phenomenal.
Yeah. Were you ever able to see Jocko live since you
Yes. Oh yeah.
assume because I remember seeing some footage of Jocko and Jeff at GIT or BIT, what I guess would have been back somewhere in that era. maybe a little bit later than.
Yeah, I don't think Jeff ever played with Jocko. I don't, and honestly, he did do a rock and roll fantasy camp one time, but he would never do that sort of thing. Very shy. So, uh,
Jocko and Jeff Berlin, you mean?
oh, Jeff Berlin.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Beck.
No, 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 no. Jeff Berlin. I saw a video, an old video of
Yeah,
Jeff Berlin and Jocko together at the GIT era, like the
dig
earlier
it.
earlier days, an older thing. So, and I didn't know if you had met him, seen him perform a lot.
Yeah, the first time I met him was at a NAMM show, and they would have, they probably still do, but I don't go to them anymore. Sometimes after the show was over, some of the manufacturers would have a hotel room and invite certain people in. And I don't know how I got the invite, but Dale Zdenek Books was having a thing, and Joe Diorio was a part of it, and I was glomming onto Joe, and there was about, God, 6 or 8 of us GIT students there, and I had my clunky cassette recorder, um, just because I was a nerd, and Instamatic camera. Um, and then Joe, European guitarist named Attila Zoller, Carl Burnett was playing drums, and you know, did maybe 3 or 4 songs, and then in walks Jocko. And Jocko immediately got on the drums for the first 3 or 4 songs, and everything sounded like Teen Town. That was his groove.
Right.
And then he switched over to bass, and to be there at that time and this far away from him was just stupendous. And I saw Weather Report several times after that. In fact, I went to visit my sister one time in Berkeley, California, and I had no idea what gigs were going on at the time. And I normally wasn't a newspaper reader, but she had one laying around, and I was looking at it going, that night, Sonny Rollins, Pat Metheny, and Weather Report on the bill. And I said, I came to visit you, but I ain't staying. And I'm like, "Shoo." I took a bus or something to get there. And I remember I was not dressed appropriately. I had a t-shirt and it got cold at night, but Weather Report. Oh my God. I remember they started, was it Black Market that starts with a train sound? And I'm seriously, I didn't smoke anything, right? And I'm looking around, I'm feeling like there's a train that's going to come through the crowd because it was that quality of sound. It was just mind-boggling. And I told Peter Erskine recently, I also saw them in a college in San Diego, and I saw the first of 2 shows that night. And when the first show was over, I was just stunned at how it was possible for them to play another show the same night. Because the energy was so high and relentless, and they left it all on the stage. And I'm like, how can you possibly doing that again without recovery? you know? So
Yeah,
yeah, I saw them quite a few times.
that that has to be at their height the closest thing that you would get a, again, for lack of a better word, a fusion group to be a Led Zeppelin experience where, I mean, it's that visceral, that powerful, and they had all the elements in terms of the interplay, but just the larger than life personas on stage. You wouldn't be out of hand comparing Jocko to Jimmy Page in terms of just such a somebody to look at and just go, oh my God, look at that guy doing backflips and just doing the third stone from the
Yeah,
sun thing and all that crazy
yeah,
stuff.
Jocko was a total rock star. I remember when I saw him in Berkeley, he had a roadie came out and spread baby powder all over his area, and that's so he could shuffle his feet and dance easier. And he did, man. That band was on fire, every single one of them. And if you haven't seen it, there's a documentary on Wayne Shorter that came out recently that's really excellent. It's a 3-part on, I think, Netflix that you can see that's just so well done. I mean, what a genius of a player he was.
Yeah, we're kind of talking about an era where what I remember of the documentary where Wayne started to kind of pull back a little bit and feel like, man, I'm kind of, this isn't my thing anymore in the sense of he needed the dynamic range, I get, the that kind of space to be able to create, and it was becoming shorter, and everything was on 10.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're all thankful he was in the band as long as he was, but he definitely needed to go off on his own.
Yeah.
I mean, even Miles Davis recognized that Miles' band wasn't enough for him. You know,
Right.
Miles told him, "You really need to do your own thing," even though Miles poached him from another band.
Are there players that fans of yours might be surprised to know that are influences? Some folks that are maybe off the beaten path that would be like, oh man, I had no idea you were, a Michael Hedges fan, or I had no idea that,
Yeah.
any
Oh yeah, probably a lot. My musical tastes run all over the map, from Crystal Method, The Prodigy, to Afro Celt Sound System, stuff on Peter Gabriel's label. I just had a thing that just came out, I think yesterday. It's my 10 top influence records. And one of them is this pedal steel player named Bruce Caphan, Kaphan. And he's got a record called Slider that is just mind melting. It's not a flash record by any stretch, but it's such a high level of harmonic knowledge and taste and audio perfection that's one of my desert island discs. In fact, I sent it to Jeff Beck when I was with him because I knew he would dig it, and his response was, "Wow, I wish I had recorded that." You know?
yeah.
So, yeah, and Weather Report, several from Black Market to Mr. Gone. Those are my big records with and Joe DiOrio. I listened to all of his records, solo records and trio records. So yeah, I've been into a lot of different bags. Early blues when I was 13, 14. B.B. King, John Lee Hooker, Sonny Terry, and Brian and McGee. In fact, my dad took me to see those guys. And when you're at that age and you see a club that probably held 100 people and you're that close to the players, it really makes an impact.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've seen stuff all over the map.
Yeah, especially folks, artists that are that closely tied to the original source. In this case of the blues, to be, they're so steeped in it. You're getting such uh, it's not cut at all. It's all very fresh and, but I mean, it's you're getting a very heavy adult dose of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, I saw Charlie Musselwhite at
Oh,
a concert too, and those that era of harp players is just spectacular.
yeah.
Yeah. And
There's a,
all those I mean, Buddy Guy is about the only guy left from that era.
yeah, yeah, you're right. It's a yeah, it seems like we kind of, I think I might be a little bit younger than you, but essentially we're contemporaries. I'm 58, but to come up in the 70s, the 60s and 70s, and then forward is just, you'll look back 100 years from now and say, my gosh, the players that we had to go see in a
Yeah.
small period of time, um, in the mid 70s, to be able to see Jeff's band with Jan Hammer, or to see Weather Report, or to see Return to Forever, Mahavishnu, all that, and then Led Zeppelin, or what all the other, for me, Pink, I'm in a Pink Floyd tribute group, so David Gilmour's my number one influence. But it was just an amazing period of time and now I'm sounding like the old guy back in my day, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
but it was,
I mean, music, honestly, I think it was a lot more vibrant back then because you weren't glutted with everybody with their home recording studio putting out, there's probably 1,000 releases every single day. And it's just, how do you sift through all that crap? I mean, there are people that rise to the top, the YouTube stars and Instagram stars and that kind of stuff. But there was there was a vibe back in the day when you actually got the album and you knew who the producer was and you could see the art and really touch and feel what the whole thing was. And there was the mystery of who are the people behind these recordings. You got to subscribe to Rolling Stone to find out rather than just dial up on the Google, and like, then you're on to the next thing because you have the Starbucks VIP card, right? And you're just like
Yeah.
zoom, 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 zoom,
So,
digest, move on.
but you would create a space in most of us, it was in our room, but we would create a space to put the headphones on and get the album out and consume the music as you're consuming a book, chapter
Yep.
by chapter or track by track. And it was I've I've had this discussion several times, so it does come up a lot for the folks that I've interviewed, that is something that I think people are starting to get into a little bit because vinyl sales are kind of increasing.
Yeah.
Hopefully, people have the attention to just sit down and spend time with it, because it really, you do go deeper into it. There's something about the artwork. It's often referred to as the poor man's art collection. Your albums. If you didn't have money to buy really nice artwork, you had your album collection of really cool, whether it's Bitches Brew or uh, Animals by Pink Floyd. It was very cool stuff to look at. And there was a
And the ownership of the music. When you actually put out cash to buy a record and you own it, and like I just put up a post, I think Bandcamp is the only place you can pay anymore. Yeah, I was the stickler that would, if it's on iTunes, I will pay for it. I'm not going to steal it off of YouTube. But now, it seems like business, every musical era finds a way to screw the artists,
yeah.
and they've succeeded yet again.
Uh, you were talking earlier about uh, just being able to see different artists and going to see different shows, and there's such a variety. The one thing I found interesting is with somebody like Jeff, if you really liked a particular album and you felt like he was going to follow that up with something similar, it was never the case.
Yeah.
Whenever it was done, it was like, okay, I don't want to, I don't want to ever, you know, it's going to take me a while to circle back around to this because there's so many other things. And Steve Lukather had mentioned that producing Jeff was so difficult because he just didn't want to retread. If it even smelled remotely like something that he had done before, he was just not interested.
Yep. Yeah. He was always growing till the very end. He took pride in being what he termed as an unpredictable bastard. You know? And his fans just had to get used to it. I remember I was so into Blow by Blow, and I was working at a record shop when Wired came out. And I listened to it and I go, this ain't Blow by Blow. And it took a minute for me to get into it. Now it's one of my favorite records. And then There and Back, and then you got Tony Hymas in there. And that is not Jan, that is not Max. And he just kept going. And that's part of why he wanted me in the band. And for me to be a second guitar player as opposed to bringing in a keyboard player, because it was adventurous, and he's the kind of guy that jump and the net will appear. Well, the net said, guitar ain't gonna cut it, I'm gonna bring in guitar synth. But still, it was a completely different element for him. That was, I'm sure it was very shocking for a lot of people when we went out on tour, and all the guitar nuts. And in fact, a lot of people just blew me off as a pop thing because I had been with Michael Jackson. And a friend of mine said, when I joined Michael Jackson, or Jeff Beck, I was having this discussion with a guitar player friend of mine, and I said, yeah, I wonder how people perceive me. I sometimes think about that. And he goes, are you kidding me? Guitar players hate you. It's like the most coveted gig on earth. So what are you going to do?
Yeah,
Fortunately, most of that was before social media. There wasn't Facebook people going, why is she in the band?
I would take that as the ultimate compliment, because you there's so many people that would want that gig, that have spent a lot of time aping Jeff and trying to be. So I'm sure you've learned a ton of Jeff's stuff, but you knew him so well to know what's going to serve him in his vision to get to the
Yeah.
next. You knew him intimately in terms of even before you had met him, I'm sure you knew his stuff inside and out. And so when the tour came around, you knew exactly, okay, well, here's what would serve Jeff. Here's how I could be the best service to this band. You know.
Well, yeah, I think that's what a lot of people get wrong, and that's why they're not successful. You got to realize the situation that you're in and the purpose that you're there. And when you have a star, I mean, Jeff would never call himself a star, but he was the focus. His name is the reason people are buying tickets, although, you might have Terry Bozzio fans that also want to go because of the drums. But I knew I was there for a support role. And, it wasn't about me. And I would have been happy not to play any solos and just play rhythm in that situation. And several times, I mean, throughout the whole time I was with him, every once in a while he'd say, I should really give you 2 or 3 songs on your own. And I said, no, absolutely not. No, I mean, I had a few solos and that was fine. I was totally happy with that. And I actually didn't, absolutely would not want the pressure of a Jeff crowd having to sit through 10 minutes of me doing a couple songs. I mean, maybe they would enjoy it, but that's not why I was there. And it's like in the Michael Jackson thing, I was there basically to play the Beat It solo and to groove. That was it. You know, everybody had their place. The dancers didn't need to be drummers, you
Right.
know?
Right. And that's young younger players certainly probably have a hard time wrapping their mind around in the span of your career, if especially if you're being somebody that's serving the song and working as a side person, whatever, um, just how much rhythm guitar is involved, and
Yeah.
how little shredding is actually, you know, when it does come up, it has to be great tone, great time, great fit. It all has to be there. It's not to denigrate it at all, but man, your rhythm chops are where it's at, and your rhythm chops are going to inform how you're going to sound as a soloist. Usually, it's
Yeah.
very rare when you hear somebody that's got rhythm chops that's also a good solo that has bad time on when it comes or a good pocket.
That reminds me, there's a woman I just discovered months ago on TikTok and Instagram named Ella Feingold. And her whole thing is Motown. And she breaks down the parts, the sounds, the effects, the guitars that were played back then. And her groove, there's nothing better. And it's so important. And, there's a lot of YouTube stars that are shredding in every video. And and it just really hit me when I saw her stuff. It's like, yeah, that's the underneath, and that's why she's always working. So, it's one thing to be a YouTube star, and there are some fantastic players on there. But if you're going to get hired as a hired gun, you got to have some other elements going on.
Yeah, and that's the thing that would if I only came up in the era of YouTube and it was just me in a room like this making videos for Instagram or whatever without the with all the decades of being able to play with other musicians, I that would be it seems it seems very wrong to not. I mean, that's the joy of why we got into it was the playing with other musicians and learning and nothing better than being in a band where you got your ass kicked because you knew on the other side you were going to be better.
Yeah, well, it's a whole other element, and I'm sure it's disappointing to people that spend years on YouTube that haven't played with bands and then go to play with a band and go, all of a sudden I have all these audio challenges. The bass is sucking up my guitar frequencies and the drums are loud and I'm not getting the same satisfaction, you know? So it's just a whole other muscle. And you can't expect to just go from your bedroom studio to stage
Right.
and be satisfied. It's a whole other thing.
and it's just the life experience. I'm sure you
True.
would agree the thing that when musicians get together, whether it's a NAMM show or you run into each other at the airport, the things that you talk about and laugh about and the shared things that you bond over are the fucked up gigs. How this went wrong and that went wrong. And it's
Yeah.
that whole thing that tragedy plus time equals comedy. You can look back on it at some point and say, man, I remember that gig, or, oh, remember that tour that we did and such happened. It's the human element where things go wrong. And that's what you don't get if you're in your room making videos, the experience of, being in Clearwater, Florida when the bus breaks down and, or what some crazy.
Yeah. That reminds me of a friend of mine met Jocko on the road at one point, and he regrets for the rest of his life. He goes, "All we talked about is where to do your laundry when you're traveling." And after the fact, he's going, "I could ask him about this or that or that or that," but no, it was about laundry because that's what we all have to figure out when we're out there for a long time.
Yeah, it's really hard to when you meet your heroes, for them to be able to have. You almost have to have repeated exposure because when you've been around for a while, you realize that uh, you can't be too much of a fan. It just that's just going to push them away. You kind of have to slowly ease into conversations like that, but work up to start with stuff like laundry and you know
Yeah.
finding.
Which remind apparently over fangirled one time with Wayne Shorter. We were in line, I think in Germany on a Jeff tour, and he was a couple people ahead of me to get currency exchange. Well, obviously it had to be before the euro happened. And I don't think I was obnoxious, but I told him I was such a huge Weather Report fan, and he just kind of acknowledged, and next thing I know, he's out of the line. He had no interest in being in my space.
Yeah, I mean that's happy, but you never really know what could have been. He could have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we've all um, had that kind of experience where you just get so excited. My abiding memory of meeting Alan Holdsworth was at a place called Bogarts in Cincinnati, and right across the street they had this. I wonder it was at some point it turned into like a beer and wings joint, but prior to that, it was kind of like a craft beer place, and they had a bunch of different beers, and they had his favorite brown ale that he could only get in England, and he was so happy, and that's all he wanted to talk about. And
Well, he was an aficionado of that. He made his own beer at home.
yeah, he loved bicycles and beer and fine.
Okay, I got one for you. I once did a guitar conference in Baltimore, and John Schofield and Pat Martino were there. And at the end of the night, man, I'd give anything for film of this because it was so ridiculous. The three of us, actually four of us, it was Pat's wife also, um, were at a table drinking and talking, and all they wanted to talk about was Michael Jackson. I mean, these guitar gods, right?
Yeah, Pat and
Martino, I mean, Jesus Christ. Pat Martino wants to talk about Billie Jean. Like, what is wrong with my universe right now?
yeah, yeah, you're wanting to talk about more, more minutia of jazz and what, and they want to talk, pop culture and Michael Jackson, but
I
yeah,
found that with several people, like John McLaughlin, same thing. Tommy Emmanuel, they just want to talk about Michael Jackson.
wow,
Okay, let's talk about Michael Jackson.
well, you've had a wonderful career, and the thing that I love that I've seen in some interviews is that you're out doing your thing. Um, where you're going out and doing your shows with video and that kind of stuff, and the like an Adrian Legg or Kaki King or whomever, being just out there doing it on your own terms without. It's a very freeing thing to not
Yeah.
have the weight of being responsible for a band and getting them from point A to point B and just dealing with all the other. It's very liberating to be a one person show. That's a bit. I commend you on that. It's Awesome.
Well, how that came about was I had my third record done, which is a CD DVD, and I had videos for that. And I started thinking to take my band out on the road. I started visualizing it like, okay, now we're on a bus, we're going to this city or that city, and what happens if nobody shows up to see us? I'm thinking, you can lose money, so much money, so fast, and there is no guarantee of anything. And I did a tour in Europe for, I think, 2 weeks early on, and I lost $5,000 because I'm paying the band, and even though it was full every night, there was expenses that kicked my ass. So I basically broke out in hives thinking of taking my own band out. And I go, there's got to be another way. I've done 1,000 workshops playing to tracks, but that's not entertaining enough for a club, really. So I thought, okay, there's got to be another visual aspect. And that's where I came up with the films. And I put out the word for over a year to film schools and online that I was looking for films for my tunes. And I sent out MP3s for people to work on. And after all that time, I only had 4 films. And I go, that's not going to cut it. And one of the guys that made the films showed me how to do it myself. And that, I don't have any more fun on earth than sitting with a laptop making films for music. I mean, it's even more fun than making music for me. And so it just became a thing. And I've done quite a few tours with just that. I got a few dates coming up. And it's something that I had an agent in Italy that would book a trio or sometimes quartet. And for the dates that he wasn't able to book the band, he could always send me somewhere to do my solo show while they're waiting in a hotel room. So it's just practical more than anything. I mean, it's fun, and it's not all I would want to do because obviously you don't have the interaction with the band. But it's a lot more controlled.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's not going to be too loud because you have, at least for yourself, the front of house, and anything goes with the front of house. But yeah, it's something that keeps evolving. In fact, the last film I did was for a Jeff Beck song called Porcupine. I got a ton of solo stuff of my own material, but I've done a lot of covers now too. And when I first started, man, I'd be downloading films, and this is how the internet was. I would click download for a film, a public domain film that I could actually use and cut and stuff at midnight and hope it was done by breakfast. That's how slow the internet was back by then. It was a good 15 years ago now. And now since then, there's subscription sites where you can get the most amazing 4K resolution film that's much better than anything I could shoot myself. So it's a much faster process now. And then I haven't even dipped my toe into it, but I'm dying to check out AI to see what I could do with that. I mean, I wonder if you could just chat GPT. Here's a tune I'm going to upload. Can you make a film, an animation for me that it cut to the beat? And,
Runway.
Runway?
Check it out. Yeah, just like it sounds, Runway. I think it
Okay.
might be, but yeah, I would look into that as well.
Okay,
That might be able to serve you well.
great. I certainly will.
Yeah. Man, this time has just flown by. Engaging conversationalist. Thank you so much. This is a real treat. It's nice when your heroes turn out to be amazing people.
Well, this was fun. I tend to motor mouth once I get
Yeah.
rolling, a little caffeinated and rolling.
Yeah,
Well, thanks for thinking of me.
absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in to the Guitar Hang Podcast, interviews with noteworthy guitar players from around the world. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to stay updated on our latest episodes.